this brings us nicely onto the dangerous implications of the new US-Israel-Iran war. I repeat, the dangerous implications of the new US-Israel-Iran war. And, the implications are many, but one of them happens to be that all those countries relying on their energy from the Gulf will suffer more. So over to you, Glenn. We have a few scenarios in a neat table which people can ask for. We have our FOI Iran report. So anyone who wants it, email us, we'll send it to you. But why don't you walk us through the scenarios, sir?
I'll try. We all have, of course, everyone's eyes go to the glittering and moving object. It's instinctive. We can't help it. And it's also important. So all of us are watching what's happening in Iran as the United States initiated a major war in a critical part of the world. Nonetheless, or that said, we will try to avoid the glittering facets and try to look at the deeper changes that this may portend. So intelligence services and we, and the State Department too, since the future is unpredictable, can nonetheless discern or attempt to discern with some accuracy broad trends, and will do usually three scenarios, depending on how some immediate factors play out. Will a particular battle go one way or another? Will an interest rate go one way or another? And how would that imply the cascading, extending decision tree and consequences of those acts, and then come up with broader trends? And that's what we've done. So three scenarios that we can see. The first has almost been disproven, or it has been disproven for a month, which is that Iran would fold under the tremendously effective, in many ways, onslaught by the U.S. and Israeli air forces, fundamentally.
Just to give, Glenn, sorry to interrupt, just to give people an idea about the numbers, by day 21, the US and Israel had struck 7,800 plus targets. They had destroyed 120 plus vessels. They had flown 8,000 plus combat flights. And these flights had struck 900 targets in the first 12 hours. So, yes, impressive. A huge success, a stunning tactical success.
But this has largely been, this likelihood has been disproven every day with continued Iranian defiance. And why is the prospect of Iran folding as a result of the U.S.-Israeli military pressure low? It's quite interesting, really. It's not simply will and hostility, but good planning on the part of the Iranians about the year. There are two different times, but at two different points in the past 25 years, one around 2003 and the other, I think it was 2008 or 9, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, who are really the power that runs the country. We think of it as a theocratic.
Sorry, Glenn, sorry to interrupt. They are the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the Praetorian Guard of the Islamic Republic, which came to power, which came to power after the 1979 revolution.
So they have progressively, the IRGC, which is really an army linked directly to the spiritual leader, not the civil structures of the state, have progressively come over the past 50 years now to dominate the state, dominate the military power and decisions, dominate foreign trade. They run and frankly to dominate the mullahs. Not entirely. There is a dynamic. There's a very complex political series of power centers that cooperate, compete, and conflict. But fundamentally, it's Iran has become a garrison state run by the Iranian or Islamic Revolutionary Guards. They made a very smart decision, which was to say, we cannot, to realize we the IRGC, Iran, cannot go toe-to-toe with the Israelis or the Americans, the great Satan and the little Satan. They can defeat us and will in any conventional clash. However, if we adopt a multi-layered, dispersed command and control structure based along the lines of Communist Party cells, nothing to do with the ideology, but to the structure of power sharing and control and command, then we will be resilient. It's the same approach.
They called it the mosaic. They called it the mosaic strategy, just to give people a bit of color. This mosaic strategy means that the 31 different provinces, commanders can make decisions on their own, use their own judgment. Of course, they have written orders before. They also planned for a succession up to 4 levels. So let's assume you knock off A, then you knock off B, then you knock off C. There's still D. They've planned that out. They also, I'll hand it over to you, Glenn, and they also have dispersed their fissile material. They have deep underground missile infrastructure. They have drone manufacturing dispersed all across pretty much the country. And they have emulated very much the Viet Cong in some ways. Over to you, Glenn Carle.
Right, so it's dispersed, diverse, multi-layered, and decentralized. And it's the exact same model that the United States military and most militaries and private companies have taken with regard to communication. If you have a single point of failure, then you cut a telephone wire, a telegraph wire, and all of a sudden communication stops. But if you have 50 different telephone wires going 50 different routes, then you have a much harder problem if you're the opponent in trying to stop the command and control. This is why one satellite is good, but 5,000 satellites make it fundamentally impossible to stop the communications of the U.S. Defense Department. And in this instance, they're quite hard to decapitate and disorient and render incapable of action the Iranian power structure. And that's what the U.S. is confronting. And then there's the issue of will and objectives. And something that Atul and I have spoken about in other settings, a lesson that any negotiator and war fighter policymaker should learn early on, is that no argument is ever done. You never win an argument unless there's some mutual agreement. You can dominate, you can impose some, possibly, if you have great strength. But even if you do, the other side simply won't agree, and it will continue forever to pursue its interests as it sees them. No one ever is cowed or humiliated. One may be humiliated, but that increases one's opposition to the entity that humiliated you. So there's no end unless it's agreed to on both sides. So that the Iran folds prospect is low, is low. The second scenario is an early negotiated peace. Now we could say, I don't know if a month end is early. I think you can still argue 1 month war is not long. This is actually possible. The Iranians, all of us on the world now are in, and I would argue, the shocking position where when you hear conflicting statements about ongoing or the lack of ongoing back channel negotiations between the United States and Iran, one, I think, should assess that it is probably more likely to be accurate statements, characterizations coming out of Tehran than out of the White House, which is quite shocking because they are a duplicitous group, quite hostile to the West. But we all should know by now the man in the Oval Office. But there are signs. It certainly would be a rational result from both parties' perspectives to negotiate a settlement. However, that yes, please. I'm sorry, Atul.
I mean, Glenn, I was going to interject and say there are three parties. It is a ménage à trois, and all three have different incentives. And the Israelis certainly see this as existential. They don't want to stop. They believe that and this is not just the Likud people, this is even people who have opposed Bibi Netanyahu, even the centrist people like Joseph Olmert, people who've served in their intelligence and security services. They think that should the regime survive, the regime will go nuclear. And should the regime go nuclear, this regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has chanted death to Israel for decades, will use the nuclear weapon against Israel. And so they want to mow the lawn, which is the term they use for decapitating the top leadership, and keep mowing the lawn until the regime crumbles and collapses. And they want Americans to come along for the ride. Now, of course, Americans want an off-ramp, and Donald Trump wants to get out of it because I suspect all the money coming in from the Gulf may dry up. He may have his own interests. But there is no incentive for the Iranians, or low incentive, I shouldn't say no, to join the negotiating table, because they think we can negotiate something, and we may be negotiating something, and we may still be taken out. And there is this fear that come what may, whether we agree to something or we don't, we are on the menu. It's like the walrus and the carpenter, an analogy often used by many people. They are on the menu. And so trust is really low, which is why the likelihood, as we see, is low. It is the most rational thing to do because Iran has proven its point in a way, and it can claim that it has saved honor. And the US can also say it has saved honor by, killing, or rather the Israelis have killed the top leadership for the US, but they have killed Khamenei. So each side can claim victory and walk away rationally, and yet it seems unlikely they will do so.
Well, all of this has been talking around the objectives, the scenarios, which we haven't finished going through. Your comments about the ménage à trois, which is an important point to make, have not touched upon what really should be the fundamental question. The first question that anyone who goes to war should address before pressing the trigger or issuing the order, which is, what are we trying to do? What are our objectives? And I've spent my life quoting a French proverb. I think it's, I believe it is Montaigne, who said, "Nul vent ne sert un navire qui n'a point de port destiné," which means that whatever wind is blowing, it serves no purpose if you have no destination. Where are you trying to go? I am laughing because it's so fundamental and so clearly ignored in this war. What is the United States trying to achieve? Now, the Israelis are more clear. They want to see Iran no longer a strategic threat. That's legitimate. Yeah. You can agree or disagree, but it's certainly sensible. If you have decided or believe that you're existentially threatened, then you should, if you want to survive, you need to end that threat. The only way to end that threat is to change the regime or destroy it. So long as the regime, which is Iran, has as one of its founding principles, its objectives, the destruction of Israel, which is what Iran claims to want to do. Now, if in fact they actually seek to do that, is another question. But any person or state that hears another say that I exist to kill you can rationally respond, well, I better do something to stop that threat. The Americans don't have that objective. What is the American objective? We do not know. Is it to destroy the regime? Is it to eliminate the threat to the region and to Israel from nuclear weapons? Is it to stop Iranian expansion and efforts beyond its borders in the region? Each of those is a legitimate objective, potentially, if the assessment of the intentions is accurate. But we do not really know. Of course, because all of us have been listening for years now, although some, not all, have been hearing Donald Trump say 7 things contradictory with each other simultaneously every day. So we do not really know. However, because the regime in Tehran is proving resilient, what seems to have been the implicit hope, almost explicit, I guess, of the first 2 or 3 days, which is that a strong blow against conventional capabilities of Iran and elimination of the top leaders would cause the regime to fall.
To implode because of economic distress and domestic unrest.
Since that has not proven to be the case, and probably was clear would not be the case before it happened, although that is debatable, to be fair. That is debatable, at least. The White House seems to be shifting towards a more achievable series of quote objectives, which would be the mowing the grass approach, which is that we have reduced Iran's conventional capabilities to take harmful actions that cause death outside of its borders for a period of years. And that clearly is the case, and that is an achievement on by the U.S. and Israeli militaries. And we then, Washington and Jerusalem, I guess I have to say, instead of Tel Aviv, will accept your continued existence. I would wager
what you're now getting on to, Glenn, sorry to interrupt, is scenario 3, that should there not be a negotiated peace, there is also scenario 3 wherein the US and Israelis, the Americans and Israelis could declare victory and unilaterally cease conflict, unilateral cessation. But again, we would assign this as low because of the depth of Israeli sentiment and threat perception. Israel genuinely is concerned, perturbed, and absolutely absolutely carries a fundamental conviction that, as Bibi Netanyahu said, if not us, who? If not now, when? And they really do think they will not get an opportunity again.
Yeah. Those are the questions, and the answer is that if not, forget the now when, if not us who, is that so long as the Americans are there to carry the water, then Israel can continue. But that Israel cannot on its own achieve the destruction of, or to invade Iran in a way that would cause the regime to collapse. So Israel is influential in this, but the United States, the White House, will really decide whether the fighting continues or not. Not that the hostility will continue, which will abide for Israel so long as Iran remains fundamentally the mullah's regime. But the fighting is really in the control of, whether that persists or not, is in the control of the White House, I think. And then the last, which is high, is that the conflict could continue to escalate, because
and
what
that
does
is
the United
scenario
States do?
4. The escalation ladder, conflict escalates.
The United States and the world can't really happily accept that the Straits of Hormuz remain closed. And so long as hostilities continue, the Iranians will continue to try that. That is the one card they really have to play, and it's a powerful card. And so what is the solution? Humiliation on the part of the United States? Possible, unlikely, as you said, or continued the continued status quo deteriorating, which is likely for the moment, or to resolve this, which the United States can do, would imply an escalation of conventional fighting, which means American soldiers on the ground seizing Carle Island, where 90% of Iran's oil passes through, and seizing in under various definitions, the Iranian littoral coast of the Persian Gulf, which it can do, and then open the straits at the cost, undoubtedly, of a certain continuous level of American casualties. And that's where things are likely to go. We don't know. You can only go in those directions.
So very quickly, let me run through some of the economic consequences or implications of the Iran war, which we must give thanks to our colleagues, managing partner of FOI, Sanjay Acharya, and the economist and investor, Manu Sharma. And
I think just for the help of our friends, listeners, we should both try, this is an exhortation to myself, just to tick off a couple of points in the short, medium, long term, lest we take us off into, like the Middle East struggles, into an endless discussion that never resolves.
Exactly. We cannot go back to the beginning of the Safavid Empire, which we did in our podcast. So short-term implications: within 6 months, oil and gas supplies from the Gulf will remain throttled. Only a handful of ships are passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Demand for alternative sources rise. This is good for Canada. This is good for Norway. This is good for Russia.
And this is under whatever way the war goes.
Yes.
Really.
But in the short term, the global supply of refined products such as liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, which is used for cooking all across South Asia, that's going to be a problem. Naphtha, that's a problem. Jet fuel, already shortages. Diesel, ethane, propane, butane, so on and so forth. Flights become more expensive. Now, the supplies of industrially important byproducts of oil production and resources produced using cheap energy will also be blocked. What does that mean? Sulfur, asphalt, lubricants, plastics, petrochemicals such as benzene, toluene, xylene, and so on. So what this does is industrial costs go up. Also, helium, nitrogen, ammonia, urea, and aluminium, which are sourced because the Gulf is cheap energy. They are fundamental to critical industrial and agricultural processes. So, in the short term, they will rise up. And
this is already happening. Already one hears in the Middle West of the United States groans and expressions of anger and anxiety, alarm by American agribusiness expressed directly to the White House, because they're saying, even though many of them are strong Trump supporters, look, what are you doing to us? You're killing us.
Exactly. And so in the medium term, which is within a year, these rising costs of industrial feeder products will lead to higher prices as well as cuts downstream production. So the supply shock will be pretty harsh and pretty strong. And any products requiring fuel or plastics, which will see higher input costs. Now, agriculture will suffer. Why? Because first, of course, you have higher fuel costs. Second, then you have higher fertilizer costs. A third, then this feeds into food shortages. Crop yields will go down. And because crop yields go down, there'll be food shortages and higher food prices. And right now, in the Northern Hemisphere, spring planting season has begun or is about to begin. So this is a critical time when fertilizers are off, basically off supply. A third of fertilizers come from that region, come from that narrow Strait of Hormuz. So this is major, and this will be a bigger problem in poorer countries. Expect Pakistan to have a problem, Bangladesh to have a problem, India to have a problem. There's a wonderful graph, various people have come up with about which countries are most vulnerable, and it's a combination of how much they import from the Gulf and how much, what is the amount of remittances they get. And there are many countries that are extremely vulnerable. So what they'll have is after
so that's short term, medium term.
That's medium term. So after a fuel, fertilizer, food crisis, there'll be a forex crisis. So they'll have pressure on their currencies. They will even have pressure on balance of payments. And even richer countries like Japan and South Korea have already seen downward movement in their stock markets. And their industrial companies, and mind you, East Asia is the factory of the world. Their industrial companies are going to suffer. So this is huge. So moving back to the Gulf in the medium term, the Gulf is not getting oil revenue or gas revenue or any of these revenues from any of the allied oil and gas products or aluminium. Please.
So I think we're going to have global medium term and short term.
Yeah, so in the medium term, let me quickly finish. So their export revenues have gone down and they import all their food. And so their imports have been throttled and the costs therefore have gone up. So Gulf monarchies will face a resource crunch. And to meet that resource crunch, because if they don't, they have very generous welfare states, they may lose political stability. They've already had instability not too long ago during the Arab uprising, especially Bahrain. So what will they do? They will draw down investments in private and public companies in the US and Europe. They will sell them. They will sell precious metal holdings. They will pause purchases of US debt because they won't be getting as much debt. And the US has $39 trillion of debt. So it needs to sell this debt. And these Gulf monarchies were a very reliable buyer of US debt, especially Kuwait, although it's a small amount, but still, all of them together, significant. And they will pause funding of new investments, particularly in AI. So what can we expect in the medium term? Within a year, asset prices to experience a more sustained decline than currently anticipated. We think Wall Street is wrong. Glenn and I think that often Wall Street is far too short-termish, and people who end up in business schools can be a bit Pollyannish. LNG-dependent countries such as South Korea and Japan, as well as Asian emerging markets, will suffer a lot. Longer-term interest rates will flare up worldwide, also in the US. Oil will probably trade over $100 per barrel for an extended period, regardless of whether the conflict ends. Gas prices will rise in line with oil, and precious metal prices will first fall because people will sell them to meet costs and then rise in a hockey stick pattern. So now the long-term implications, and that is within 3 years. Sustained high energy prices increase the risk of stagflation. In the 70s, we experienced that. Low growth and high inflation, typically referred to as stagflation, and that happened because of the Yom Kippur War in 1973 and because of the Iranian Revolution, 1979. And this time, inflation could be worse because of decades of loose monetary policy. Supply shock is coming at a time when we have a lot of money floating around the economy, and this could trigger hyperinflation. So prices rising by more than 50% per month in several countries. And this is very worrying, and this is very concerning for all of us who live in the US and who have had the advantage of relatively cheap prices in the US and the land of plenty in the US, where Amazon can deliver anything to anyone's doorstep almost in the click of through the click of our fingers, or Walmart has all kinds of products, or Costco, or whatever, and that is all facilitated to some degree because of the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar. And the US dollar will diminish in global status because Gulf energy monarchies have historically denominated their energy products in US dollars, forcing energy consumers to purchase dollars in exchange for oil and gas. And this arrangement is known as the petrodollar. And Gulf royals are largely from dynasties installed by the British Empire. In fact, the borders were also drawn by the British and to some degree by the French. Yeah. So that is, a major thing. And then, of course, we've already alluded to political instability. We've alluded to East and Southeast Asia. And the most important thing is other countries will lose confidence in US security guarantees, because if the US cannot open the Strait of Hormuz, can it guarantee security for Taiwan? Can it protect Taiwan, the Taiwan Strait? That is an operative question. And so if the US does not open the Strait of Hormuz, this could very well be 2026 could be the Suez. The Persian Gulf may no longer be an American lake. Iran may extract geopolitical rent because of control of that checkpoint or that choke point. That choke point may become a checkpoint. So a lot is at stake. But there's one good thing that'll emanate from it in the long term, which will please Glenn. Already prices of renewable companies are high, and that is that demand for renewable energy products will accelerate. One of my African friends said, we don't know if we'll get Gulf oil, but we'll always get the sun. So there's a big push towards investment in renewables, especially solar, particularly in poor countries. This is very good for China because China is the leader there. But this trend will be exponentially hastened because in so many countries, people do not have LPG cylinders to cook. Restaurants are not functioning. So this is one of those shocks which, like 1973 and 1979, is fundamentally going to change the global economy. Glenn, over to you. Closing words before we move on.
It's good to have the sun shining through the clouds, as it were, and I think it's important that we stress the structural, historic implications of the current war. I think this is a significant point that won't really benefit everyone noticeably for a number of years, but cumulatively. And I just conclude this so that we have some time to talk about the other topic. For 25 years at least, the United States intelligence community does scenarios every year. It's done it for many, many decades, but for at least 25 years, it's taken usually the 3-scenario approach, the least dramatic change, middling scenario, and the worst case scenario, and tried to weigh them as to what would happen in the international system and the balance of power among various states. And I'm afraid that we are starting to it seems that we are living the evolution at present, not irrevocably, but the current development of the worst case scenario, which is, we've all talked about already for a decade, 15 years, the end of the Pax Americana, a fractured international system, the decline of the restraints of international law, both regarding states and economic agreements and behavior, and a decline into, frankly, approaching Hobbesian state as in state of being, not a specific government, with increasing striation between the haves, the powerful, and the have-nots, the weak, what do we say now, the global south. And you can almost quote directly Thomas Hobbes from 400 years ago, almost 400 years ago. He said, in such a condition, there's no place for industry to thrive or culture of the earth, no society. Worst of all, there would be continual fear, danger, and violent death, where the life of man or of a state will be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and all too often short, because power will play out and those who have it may thrive. It's a bleak prospect. So tell us why things are happier with all of our money.
All right.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.